Saps, what's going on with Nelson Mandela?
So I want to tie Nelson Mandela to this issue with Israel and Palestine, because there's a couple of things I think that some people may not be fully aware of when we talk about apartheid and where Nelson Mandela stood. So I want to go ahead and share this here, because what you have to know is that for as many politicians that say that they stand with, Nelson Mandela and they appreciate his fight that he had in South Africa pushing back on apartheid, you have to know, it says Nelson Mandela in Palestine, in his own words, that Nelson Mandela always stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people. So I want to jump to this part here where it says our freedom is incomplete. In a 1997 speech on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, Mandela reaffirmed his support for Palestinian rights. Again, this is 1997. So I think some of you in the chat were already born before then. I know I was. We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And this is very, very important for people to really understand. When we go to Among Compatriots, it says, during a Middle East tour in 1999, Mandela visited both Israel and the Palestinian territories. While in Gaza, he said he felt at home among compatriots. And so you'll see there's mugs here that says, I love Gaza, made in Gaza. And then there's mugs here with the picture of Nelson Mandela. And so it says here he announced his support for a two-state solution, but affirmed Israel must withdraw the occupied territories. And this is part of the reason why a lot of us are against two-state solution today, is because there's too many settlements. Choose peace rather than confrontation, except in cases where we cannot where we cannot proceed, or we cannot move forward. Then, if the only alternative is violence, we will use violence. So that was the words of Nelson Mandela. It also says here, after the death of Yasser Arafat, November 11th, 2004, Mandela paid tribute to the Palestinian leader who he hailed as an icon. He was an icon in the proper sense of the word. He was not only concerned with the liberation of the Arab people, but of all the oppressed people throughout the world, Arabs and non-Arabs. And to lose a man of that stature and thinking is a great blow to all those who are fighting against oppression. Mandela would have been proud. This is another thing people may not be aware of. In 2016, Palestinians unveiled a giant statue of Nelson Mandela in the West Bank city of Ramallah. And there's that statue there. So some of you have heard us talk about this before, that there's a statue of Nelson Mandela in Palestine. Now, why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because if you are against apartheid in South Africa and you support Nelson Mandela's fight against it, in turn, you should be against the apartheid that is happening in Israel, as Nelson Mandela was. Now, Nick interviewed Nelson Mandela's grandson on RBN. So the fight still continues throughout, the rest of his family. But you have to remember, and I'll do a stream one day about the apartheid situation in South Africa, the history of that. But essentially, when you hear people talk about how to move between certain spaces in Palestine, you get a certain type of passport depending on, where you were born and depending on your religion. That is apartheid. So if you are a Palestinian Jew, you still don't have the same rights as someone who is Jewish that lives there or was born there. You don't have the same rights. An American, someone who is Jewish American, they can travel to Israel and they can move around freely. But the Palestinian people who were born there cannot. So if you're Palestinian, you were born in Jerusalem and you are Jewish, and then you have a friend who is Jewish who was born in Jerusalem, they can stay and visit Jerusalem. You cannot.
Mm-hmm.
So this is apartheid, and that's what people have to understand. And I want people to stop saying Israel's borders. Gaza is not a separate country. A fence is not a border. We've talked about this the past couple of weeks. That's just a fence. So we have to stop referring to saying that Israel has a right to defend its border. That's not a border.
Mm-hmm. Nope. It's an open air concentration camp. That's what it is.
Exactly. So it's really sad. But again, like watch, if you haven't seen it, watch the interview that I had with Katie Halper. She explains the history of Zionism a lot. And that's another thing when we talk about Zionism. Zionism, the founder of Zionism was not religious.
Mm-hmm.
This was not about religion.